Greetings. Good morning. It's an absolute privilege to be here with you, to be able to speak about my story a little bit. It's interesting. The one thing, as I'm listening to all those accolades and all those accomplishments and all that stuff, it doesn't really mean a hill of beans, really, does it? When you find out you have cancer, and when you're struggling, and when you're fighting for your life. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about my story. Greetings to my fellow brothers and sisters over there from North Charleston Police Department and from the Cancer Society and from just all the different groups that are here today. I saw your pink cruiser out there on my way in. I always feel good when I see that. Very encouraged that there's other people in this fight with me. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my story, and if you have some questions, maybe I'd love to engage in some conversation and some dialogue and kind of share. Maybe I always learn when I'm around other people on topics like this. So interesting, this whole thing has a little bit of roots at Mount Moriah, as you'll hear in just a second as I kind of open this up. In October of last year, just prior to October 1st, I was, do I need to put that up a little bit? Thank you. Thanks, Charles. October 1st of last year is when I first went to the doctor. But a couple days prior to that, I was at a restaurant with some friends and some women that were a lot smaller than I was said, "You probably should go to the doctor." And one of them's name was Tracy, and one of them was my wife. And that was a Wednesday before October 1st, which was a Friday. And I couldn't sit, but I had I've lifted weights and done sports and kind of exercised my whole life. So having back pain I wasn't a stranger to that. It kind of just happens. I'm sure a lot of people here can relate to that. So I had back pain, a little bit of sciatica, a little bit of discomfort, being able to sit down, and I said, it's normal, it'll go away, but this particular time it was not going away. Usually if I rest or change my routine or just kind of switch things up a little bit, after a couple weeks, 2 or 3 weeks, it subsides and gets better, and it just wasn't getting better. So they said, well, you need to go to the doctor. There's this place called the Spine Institute, and if you go there, it's kind of one-stop shop, and they'll take x-rays and do different things. And I said, okay, and my wife made an appointment. Her name's Caroline. She's my hero. One of the heroes of this whole story. So she makes an appointment for Friday morning, October 1st. And on that day, I was scheduled to have lunch with Charles Francis and Pastor Benton. We just happened to be doing lunch that day. So I go in and meet with the nurse. I brought a little x-ray with me that I had gotten previously, and they did another x-ray, and they said, you do have some degeneration of the disc and a little bit of maybe a pinched nerve, but really nothing substantial. It's not going to require surgery, and you're maybe a little physical training, PT, and you'll be okay. Maybe a shot, worst case scenario. But he said, I want to do an MRI, just to be sure. And he did an MRI, and after the x-ray, and he said, this has confirmed what I thought. This is what's causing your back pain in terms of, the seriousness on your spine. But when they do an MRI, I didn't know this previously, but I learned this, they do what they call a scout report. And they scout around the area beyond just the initial part that they're looking at, which for me was my spine. And they did a scout report, and the radiologist he had concerns. There was something suspicious that he didn't really like. And he said, I would like for you to do another MRI with contrast. And we'd like for you to get that today. And I looked down at my watch, and I'm like, man, I've got appointments to go to. I got a luncheon I was looking forward to, and I'm texting Charles Francis, and I think they had a funeral that day, and it kind of threw them off a little bit. And we were still planning on doing lunch. I said, when's the next appointment? I don't think I can do this today. You know, I got this luncheon to go to. And they said, well, you can do it in an hour, or it's like over 3 weeks is our next appointment. And I said, golly, you know, I'll do it today, kind of begrudgingly. And that began my journey, because they came back and they said, you have a mass on your pelvis area, your right pelvis area. And it may be metastatic, it may be cancer, I'm not a specialist in oncology or bone tumors and all that kind of stuff. I'm a spine guy, I can't really help you. So that was Friday afternoon, and we ended up, because of the funeral and because of my delay, not doing lunch, but I met with Charles. And that was his first day of retirement, I believe, right? October 1st, I think. And we were going to celebrate his retirement. And before Charles retired, I said, you know, I would like to ask you to be my prayer warrior and to be in my corner. And that was way before I ever found this out. And he said, yep, I'll be in your corner no matter what. I'll be praying for you. I'll be a spiritual advisor. I'll be your partner in Christ. And how ironic is it that we talked about that, and he's been praying for me ever since for things that we never thought was going to happen. So that weekend was a pretty busy weekend. We had some events that we had to do, and I went first thing Monday morning to MUSC and started getting tests, and met with a bone tumor expert and a guy named Dr. Letty, who's a real good doctor at MUSC. And further tests eventually revealed that I had some type of cancer. And when you hear that word cancer, it's not easy to hear. And my mom died when I was 13 of cancer. My dad was not around a whole lot, so I learned to kind of rely on other people and pastors and teachers and neighbors. And but it was unknown the type of cancer. And so part of my tests included blood tests and bone marrow biopsies and tumor biopsies and CAT scans and MRIs, and I mean, you name it, I was getting the tests. And then there was some consulting with some other specialists at MD Anderson and the Mayo Clinic. And ultimately, I was told I was going to have to get surgery, and it was going to be pretty significant to remove this tumor from my pelvis area. And at one point, I was going to get radiation, and I was literally scheduled for it. If anybody's had radiation, they put you in a device, and they put kind of tattoos on your body to make sure that they get the right spots. And I had all that done. And I went in to get my radiation one day, shortly after that, and the doc said, we're not doing radiation. And the one thing that they had told me was that it was pending the results of the biopsies. And they still had to get the lab work back and everything, and they got it back, and it was not what they thought it was. It was not the same type of cancer that they had originally kind of assumed it was, and they were waiting for these final results. And when they got them back, they said, this is very rare, but it's not what we thought. It's different. It's a type of sarcoma, which is a bone cancer, which is different than the initial assessment. We thought it was a type of blood cancer. So the next step was to get chemo. And they gave me the most chemo, I think they said, like a person can get. I mean, it was pretty heavy duty. I was in the hospital for 4 days, 24 hours a day. And if you've ever seen a person who gets chemo, this type of chemo, they actually can't even touch it. They have big rubber gloves, and they have like all the length of their arms and a big rubber suit that they put on, and to protect them from any kind of droplets or anything that might come out of this bag, which is intravenously going into my body, right? And that's the nature of chemo. It kills, all these things that, and the goal is that it doesn't kill you. So we started with that, and it was really, really challenging to get this chemo. And I got these 4-day sessions twice, 3 weeks at a time. So after 6 weeks, they measured the tumor, and they had said there's one of 3 things that can happen with this chemo. Either A, which the goal of the chemo is it'll reduce the size of the tumor and it'll make the surgery easier. You're still gonna have to have surgery, but it'll make the surgery more palatable and less challenging, maybe a little less risk and a little less invasive in terms of what they have to remove. Either A, that's the desired result, B, it just doesn't change at all, or C, it can actually increase in size. And for me, it actually doubled in size. So the tumor was not reduced, it actually doubled in size. And at that stage, it was really advanced, and it was very dangerous. And so the doctor had said, okay, well, it's time. We've got to do this surgery. And within a day or so, he called me back and said, we think you should consult with these other places that do this surgery more regularly. It's a very rare type of surgery, and some other hospitals have more advanced techniques, more advanced technology, and just more repetitions, more experience in doing these types of surgeries. So ultimately, I went to the Mayo Clinic in mid-December, and there's a doctor up there. Ironically, his name is Pete Rose, and the guy's a genius. I mean, he's amazing, godly man, and his team. And they said, we can do the surgery, and we'll schedule it. And this was mid-December that I flew up there with my wife to Rochester, Minnesota, to the Mayo Clinic, and it's a long flight, and we don't have any real connections up there, so it's a little bit intimidating to do that. And so we went up there, and they said, yep, we can do the surgery, and they scheduled it for January 4th and January 6th. And they said, you have 3 options. One is we can take the leg completely, because they have to take my pelvis. That's where this cancerous tumor was. We can salvage the leg, and then there was a third option, was part of salvaging the leg. And I said, well, if you're asking for my opinion, I want to salvage my leg, right? Of course I want to keep my leg. That's not an easy conversation, but I mean, it is what it is. I said, I want to survive, whatever it takes, that's what I want. And so the doc said, that's what we'll do. That's the option, but I have to have the authority to take the leg. If I get in there and there's stuff that, we see, we have to get all the margins. With cancer, if you don't get all the margins, then you may as well not even do the surgery. It's not worth it. So he said, we have to take this tumor plus all the margins. And if we get in there and we see that we need to, we'll take the leg. But our goal is we're going to try to salvage your leg. So they did these surgeries, and the reason why it's on 2 days is because it's over 20 hours of surgery, and the human body, they kind of need the surgeons and the body to rest a little bit in between. So they split it. I think one day was like 6 hours, and the second day was like 14 hours or so. And they had a whole team of surgeons. And the day of the surgery, January 4th, it was a Tuesday and a Thursday, I think, the doc comes in on the table. They're starting to get ready to administer the anesthesia, and the doc comes in and he says, it's a Triton tumor. They had just discovered that. The lab that does all the epidemiology and it's a very advanced system that they have up in the Mayo Clinic. They have people from all over the world that come there for these types of surgeries. And so they see a lot of these rare types of cases. And they said the Triton tumor is a very rare type of bone cancer. So if you think about sarcoma and bone cancer, there's about 75 types of sarcoma. And of those, if you add them all up, it's about 1% of cancer. And of the sarcomas, there's some that are more common than others. They're actually starting to develop some protocols and data analytics and experience with sarcoma. But they said the Triton tumor is actually so rare in the history of cancer, there's 80 to 100 cases that have ever been identified. So think about that. The whole purpose of raising money for cancer research, which I'm a big fan of the Cancer Society, and raising funds is to do research and to get data, to get experience. Like breast cancer, really, if you have early detection, if you get ahead of it, the survival rate is really high now. I mean, there's really so much that we've learned and so much that can be done now to save lives of both men and women. And that's just one of many examples of the progress that's been made. But this Triton tumor is very rare, and it's transmitted through the nerves, sheath, and I don't know all about it, but the bottom line is it's very lethal. It's very dangerous, and essentially, if he doesn't take my leg and get all the margins, he said, it's not worth it. So we have to take your leg. He told me that morning. So, and this is a faith story. This is a love story. This is a good story. Don't feel bad for me. I'm standing here before you alive and well, and I'm in the fight. Thank you so much. So during this surgery, I had a point in time, a couple times where I almost died. I was in ICU a couple times. I got a spinal fluid leak, and then I got a point where my body kind of just was almost done. And I literally laid there and just prayed and just I sang Jesus loved me, all the things that my grandma taught me and different people taught me, you know, the 23rd Psalm. And so there was a point in time, and this is going to sound really strange, but there was a point in time where I really felt like I may be going to heaven. I mean, I really believe that. And part of that maybe was the drugs. Part of that was just what I was going through. I'm not quite sure to this day exactly what happened. But here's what I'll tell you is the prayers lifted me up. And anybody in the faith who has a relationship with Christ, and I do, always have, almost my entire life since I can remember, knows that prayer works, right? And I'm going to explain to you a little bit for me personally how it worked. And I know that your church has been lifting me up. Pastor Ben, Charles, and others in this church have been lifting me up. And I cannot tell you how grateful I am for that gift. And I can tell you that as I sat there in this hospital bed where they had just taken my leg, they cut the bone, they cut the tendons, they cut the muscle, they cut the nerves. You can only imagine. I mean, women who've had babies, I could never imagine the pain of that, but I had an epidural, I had a fentanyl pump, and I had all kinds of stuff. And it didn't really even touch the pain at some points in time. I mean, several of the most powerful drugs known to mankind, I was on intravenously at one point in time, and it didn't even barely touch the pain. I got a hematoma on my nerves, and that was the one that almost kind of got me. But as I'm in this state of transition, I look up and there's like a portal. It's the only way I know to describe it. And on this portal, there's faces and there's faces of people that I know are praying for me, and they're lifting me up. And as I'm going through this, there was a couple things that came to me out of the blue. And I say out of the blue, but I mean just scripture that just completely lifted me up. And none of this story is a Luther Reynolds story. It's all God's story. It's all Christ. Every one of these things, the great things that have happened, has nothing to do with me. So at one point, I start hearing, "Be still and know that I am God. Be still and know that I'm God." And I was okay, all right. And then the other thing that came to me, and especially in the African American church, you know how to kind of get up and worship. And that's where this came from, was this is the day that the Lord has made. Let us be glad and rejoice in it. And that's one where I know you can get up and like make things happen, right? And so I'm sitting in my hospital bed, and that same spirit, that same strength, that same hope, that same optimism just like grabbed a hold of me and lifted me up, and it just completely sustained me. I was in the hospital for 40 days. I was in the hospital for 40 days. My wife likes to say 40 days and 40 nights. And I'll describe a little bit more of that journey. But when I woke up and I looked down and there was no leg there, they say that you have to mourn the loss of a limb. You know, it's not uncommon that people have amputations. This particular amputation is very, very high up, and it is very uncommon. Even among amputees, this is a very unique amputation. And I woke up and I was glad, and that's never changed. I looked down and my leg was gone, and I said, I'm not sad that my leg's gone. I'm grateful. I'm thankful that my cancer's gone. And the surgeon had come back, and he said the surgery was successful. They got all the margins. And so the second reaction I had almost immediately after that was, and I'm not saying this is easy. That's not what I'm trying to say. But my second reaction was, I don't have regrets. Some people would look down and say, "Oh, I wish I would have run a marathon." Well, I ran a bunch of marathons. They'd say, "I wish I would have traveled," or I did travel. "I wish I would have been a cop." Well, thank God I was, and I still am a cop. I love what I do. They would have said maybe all these things that maybe would have went in your head, and even just the other day I was watching somebody run stadium stairs, which I used to do when I was younger. And I can't do that anymore, but I didn't get sad. For maybe a split second I did, and then I said, you know what, there's a million other things I could do, right? I've met people who have this same amputation, that have this prosthetic, and they're like, "Luther, you can do anything you want to do. There's nothing that you couldn't do before that you can't do now. You just have maybe a little bit slower. You might get a little frustrated sometimes, but you can do all the things eventually that you did before." And so those reactions, that attitude, that's not Luther Reynolds. That was not then, is not now. That's Jesus, and that's the Lord lifting me up, and he's still got work for me to do, just like he has for everybody in this room. And that's what came out of that portal, was I eventually came out the other side of that portal, and he said, "We still have life for you. I want you to live. I have a purpose for you. You have something to do. I still have work for you to do." And so when I was in the hospital, I learned how to use crutches, how to shower, how to use a walker. They have something called phantom pain, which is bizarre. But basically, even though I don't have a leg, my brain still thinks I have a leg. And so I have the feeling that I have a leg, and sometimes it's very painful. Not always. It gets better each day. But I was in the gym this weekend and I was stretching a little bit, and I was telling the guys next to me, I said, you can't see it, but my brain thinks there's a leg that's like sticking straight out right now. Even, and they're like, wow, that's kind of weird. And I said, yeah, it is. I've since gotten a prosthetic. I thank God for that. Not everybody has that opportunity. I drive. I drove here today. I'm becoming very independent. I can get around. I have a left foot gas pedal. Never knew about that. Actually went to MVA Motor Vehicles last week and got a little marking on my driver's license. I took my driver's test with my left pedal just to make sure I kind of adhere to everything and do it properly. And I hadn't taken a driver's lesson in over 40 years. If anybody needs some tips, let me know. I was actually a little nervous, to be honest with you. So, what are some of the takeaways? And I'll end here in a few minutes, but one of the takeaways is my wife is my hero. Ms. Sonia here, who's my assistant, is one of my heroes. Charles, one of my prayer warrior heroes. I would describe this whole thing as a love story. And that sounds really strange, right? That sounds strange in the worldly terms, maybe, not so much in the faith, sitting here. But I talk about this story. I'm pretty transparent, being a public figure. I've shared my story. There's nothing I have to hide. I don't have any secrets. I'm still on chemo. In fact, I'll go in the hospital on Thursday of this week. Through the weekend, I kind of have a routine. That's my 7th time in the hospital for chemo. I typically go in for a few days. The good news is the doctors say that it's working. The doctors say that I'm pointing in a good direction. But I got to stick with it, right? Every one of these things is unique and different, and they had to adjust the cocktail, I call it, from December, where it didn't do anything. And now it is working, and it is, I'm pointing in the right direction. My wife calls me this one-legged bald guy now, but I thank God for that, right? So why do I say it's a love story? Every day I pray to God that He draws me closer to Himself, that He draws me closer to others, and He draws me closer to the path that He needs me to be on, that I can do His work, that He shows me whatever that work is, and that I can go about doing that work. And because I have cancer, because I got one leg, because I'm bald, because whatever, fill in the blank, doesn't change that at all. In fact, if anything, I'm probably a little bit more focused maybe than I was before. So another reason why I say it's a love story is the amount of cards and letters and texts and phone calls and prayers that I've gotten, whether it's from the community, from the faith community, from other churches, from my own family, from neighbors. It's just unbelievable. I can't even begin to describe to you the blessing that has been to me, to my family, to sustain me. Love does matter. We know that, right? We have the ultimate example with Jesus. And what does that look like? I've seen it firsthand, and I can promise you that it makes a difference in my life, in my healing, in my family. And I could not be more grateful for that. I got to a point when I got home, there was a bunch of cards that had stacked up. And we had a rule in the house. My wife wouldn't let me read them because I cried all the time. And let me tell you something, I was never an emotional person before. That was probably a flaw of mine. But I am now. Charles can tell you the day I found out about this, I was very, very emotional. And it'll just grip me out of nowhere. And I get emotional now, and that's just part of the deal. It can be kind of overwhelming at times. And my wife has never left my side. Every time we go to the hospital, she jokes about it being the honeymoon suite. And somehow she'll bring me some, Sonia and others, they'll bring me a shake. I like the protein shakes, and they'll bring me a meal, and we'll watch some TV or have some snacks or whatever. And it's the 7th floor of MUSC, the Ashley River Towers. If you've ever been there, you'll know what I'm talking about. It's the oncology ward, and there's not a single person on that floor that's not fighting for their life. Every one of them is fighting for their lives, and that's a humble place to be. It's a very, very humble place to be, and not everybody makes it off that floor. And I just, when I go there, I'm grateful that I have the opportunity to get treatment, that I have the opportunity to be around nurses that are nice. I could talk to you all day long about the hospital staff. Anybody here a nurse or work in a hospital? God bless you. Love you. And let me tell you something. My heroes are the nurses. And I love to talk about how I believe police, when we do it right, are like guardians out in the community. And if we do a really good job, nobody really knows it. That's okay. That's the way it should be, right? And it's the same thing with the nurses. The nurses, the techs, the people that provide the food, the people that clean the rooms, every one of them is saving lives. And they've saved my life. And every time I go in there, I tell them that I'm so grateful for their being my guardian angels. And some of them pray with me. Some of them are so, just so kind, bringing you water, bringing you ice cubes, helping you with your port, and just answering your questions and medications. And doing chemo is no small thing. It's not to get into great detail, but I can tell you one of the weirdest things I've experienced when I first got there, and they do this every time, is they tell my wife not to use the bathroom in my room, to use the one down the hallway. And the reason why they tell her that is because they flush the urine from my body down that toilet, and it has chemo in it. And that chemo can actually burn another person really badly. So that's the fluids that are in my body. And just that concept, it's hard to get your mind wrapped around that, right? But that's the nature of cancer. It is what it is. And thank God that we have chemo and drugs like that can combat that deadly disease. So a couple last things. I'll just talk about, this is very convicting to me. Convicting of my own sin, my own thoughts, my own words, my own deeds. I hope I'm always aware of that. But when you know that you're not going to be here much longer, when you think through that lens, I could be here another 10 days or I could be here another 30 years. And I know everybody comes up to me and says, it's not your time, Chief. We're not letting you go. We need you here. We're not going anywhere. And I appreciate that. But I got news for you. We're all on the clock. Every single person in this room right now. Maybe you're more so than I am, right? I'm in a men's group, and we're meeting tonight. We hadn't met for a few weeks because of the holidays, and we're meeting tonight, and we got a Tony Dungy book. We're just starting a new book, and I look at them, and I said, don't feel bad for me. Think about your own marriages, your own kids, your own neighbors, your own lives. Whatever this applies to, I may be here a lot longer than you are. You may be driving home tonight and just something happens. That's life. And so I guess the point of that is to live our lives with a sense of urgency, with a purpose, with a kind word, with a prayer, with the ability to apply what we know Jesus has applied to us, to others. And that's not an easy thing to do. It's a daily struggle, but it's tangible, it's real. And for me, it's very real, because I look at my wife, and we still fight and argue a little bit. Not as much, though, I promise you. Because, when you know you may not be around together that much longer, it has a way of changing your heart. It has a way of changing how you talk to each other. It has a way of giving you a little more patience, maybe. It's one thing to sit in the pews and put our hands up, and I love to worship the Lord, in a safe environment. It's another one to change your heart and change the way that you think and change the way that you talk to other people. And that's what Christ does for all of us, right? That's what he's always kind of chipping away, and we're like clay, and he's molding us, and he's molding me. So that's my story. I hope I'm not too serious, because I tell you got to have a sense of humor. I usually start out by telling people, you wish you had a leg like I have. Right? And you know what? I'm just grateful for you. I'm grateful for your prayers. I'm grateful for the love that you exhibit towards me. And I went to the East Side Friday night. There was a Spoleto event out there, and I hadn't been out in the community for a little while. Sometimes I'd be real careful about my numbers and all that kind of stuff. And of course, I'm sure you saw in the news, we had a big shooting there a couple weeks ago. And you know what? The amount of love and kindness toward me, people were so happy to see me. So many people praying for me, and just, I could talk about that part of it all day long. And don't ever underestimate the impact you have on other people's lives. The cards, the words, the stories, the things that I've heard and been told have brought me to tears on many occasions. Things that I had no idea, that I was having that impact on somebody. People from Maryland, where I used to be, a lot of people have reached out to me. A guy just called me last night. I hadn't talked to him in probably 5 years. And he called me last night, and we talked for probably a half hour. And he had just heard, and he called me just to offer his encouragement and his support and his prayers. And I promise you that matters. You can feel the love of other people. And I promise you, the prayers are everything to me. That's really all I have. I've been successful in my career. I've been successful financially. We don't have a lot of wants or needs. But all that doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean a hill of beans, really. It's about relationships with each other. It's about relationships with Christ. It's about purpose, and so that's it. I don't want to repeat myself. If there's any questions, please ask. Thank you so much. Thank you, and I would be remiss if I didn't recognize my wife just one last time. When we were in the Mayo Clinic, she spends the night with me. She's never not spent the night with me in the hospital and been with me the whole time. But at the Mayo Clinic, because of COVID and everything, she couldn't spend the night. So she had to get a little kind of studio, almost like an apartment or a hotel room across the street from the hospital. And she would walk back and forth at night. And if you are familiar with Minnesota, I think it's safe to say none of us wants to go up there, in terms of the winter time at least. It was 41 below one night. And it was not uncommon at all, probably average 15 or 20 below, it seems like. And she had to walk back and forth every night. She hates the cold. And she never complained. And one morning towards the end, she came in and she was bleeding. She had fallen down. And I just thank God for my wife. I mean, she's never, ever left my side. And that's a powerful, powerful thing if you think about it. And there's so many people. Charles is one of them too, in terms of praying for me, and who I couldn't, I wouldn't be here. Any one of them wasn't praying for me, or any single thing, my wife or anybody, I wouldn't have made it, and I wouldn't be here today, standing here in front of you. And so I thank you. I'm just so grateful for that and for everything.